I count it the greatest of privilege to be here tonight. The greatest of privileges. A dear man who mentors me, they asked him one time, they said, about big churches and things like that, and he said this: some of the greatest sermons that have ever been preached have been preached to 6 people. It is a privilege to come here and preach to you. But I will not come here and dazzle you. I will not come here and flatter you. I will not come here and seek to have an appearance with you. I will come here and tell you the truth. This night, the next night, the next, and the morning, I will tell you the truth. Whether it's old-fashioned, whether it's received, it does not matter. I will tell you the truth because I am not here for gain. False prophets come for gain. False prophets turn up their noses today at tents in inner cities and look for coliseums in the suburbs. The preachers see this as a wonderful opportunity to spread forth the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is where God is. Is it well with your soul? Is it well with your soul? If you die tonight, will you enter into glory, or will you split hell wide open? I don't care about your self-esteem so much. And I'm not really concerned about whether or not your checkbook is balanced. My only question is this: is it well with your soul? Now he goes on and he says this: for if we are beside ourselves, it is for God. And if we are of sound mind, it is for you. I was preaching in a church a while back, several years ago now. A very posh, very large, very beautiful church, filled with people, the balcony, all the finest of people from that area there. And the Lord laid it upon my heart to preach like a madman. And when I finished, I remember looking up in the balcony saying, some of you think I have gone mad. Then come back tonight and hear a madman rave. Now what's the point? Let me ask you a question. Well, let me tell you something first. I know it's not quoting from Augustine, it's quoting from Rocky, but it'll have to do. The trainer looked at Rocky and said, Rock, the worst thing that could ever happen to a fighter has happened to you. You've gotten civilized. The worst thing that can ever happen to a preacher is for a preacher to get civilized and respectable. The Bible says that even with Paul, sometimes he seemed to talk like a madman. And why is it? We're not talking about computers. We're not talking about some technical difficulty. We're talking about heaven and hell, life and death, God and the devil, sin and righteousness. We're talking about judgment. We're talking about eternity. How can a man not rave? How can a man not lift his voice? How can a man not have passion when he's looking at people who will die? So Paul says there was a sense in which sometimes he seemed like a madman, and if that was the case, it was for God. But also, if he's in his right mind, it was for them. What does it mean? He'd become all things to all people. To the philosopher, he would seek to speak to him on his terms. To the Jew, he thought to be a Jew. He didn't want to put a stumbling block in front of anyone for any reason. And that is why in true preaching, what sometimes you're going to come across is this. It's going to seem as though a madman is raging. And then at other times, it's going to seem as though a scientist was sitting down trying to lead you through the finest, most technical of sciences. Have you been moved by the words but you don't understand? Then guess what? This preacher will stay here all night along with the other pastors and talk to you about what has been spoken. Do we seem to be out of our mind and it's confused you, but it has intrigued you and you want to know? Then come and sit with us. And we'll talk to you about the things of God in ways you can understand. That's what Paul is getting at. Now let's go on. My favorite part, verse 14. For the love of Christ controls us. Love of Christ that did not spring forth from Paul's piety. It's something very important to understand. It was the love of Christ that came out from Christ through Paul. I want to tell you something, that prior to my conversion, I was a student at the University of Texas. And I don't know how most adequately to describe who I was, except maybe the word self-centered jerk would be good. The only thing I thought about was me. And I couldn't do anything else. It destroyed all my relationships with people. Why? Because I was all about me. That's it. When Christ came into my life, I didn't gain some piety that now I'm pious and therefore I love people. But Christ changed my heart. And He put in my heart a love for people. What am I to gain here tonight preaching under a tent? Except to have the joy of, in the name of love, preaching to you the gospel of Jesus Christ. Why would anyone come here to be a missionary except for the love of Christ? Why would anyone go off to some of the darkest, most remote places on the face of the earth except for the love of Christ? Now let me give you a warning. There are some who make great gain out of preaching. There are some who line their pockets and feed off the sheep of God. And maybe you doubt any preacher or gospel because of these wolves, but recognize this, not all of them are the same. There are people, God still has men who preach for one reason, and it is here, for the love of Christ controls us. It constrains us. It pushes us on to leave house and home and career and everything else to do what? To go out into the highways and the byways and sow the seed of the gospel. And why is it so important? Because we know it's the world's only hope. And why do we know that? Because it is our only hope. Preaching in the church in Austin this Sunday, I said, come unto Christ. All of you. Come to Christ. It doesn't matter what you've done or what you have become. Come to Christ. And I use my own life as an example. 22 years ago, the Lord found me half naked in my apartment, having slept the entire night in my own vomit, so drunk I couldn't stand. And yet He is mighty to save. And the love that He manifested to me on that day as I looked in the mirror and saw my own face covered in vomit. The love He manifested that day, surely it was enough. To not only forgive all my sins, but to cleanse me from all unrighteousness and a guilty conscience. To cleanse it. The love of Christ constrains us to be here. He goes on. The love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died, and He died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for Him who died and rose again on their behalf. Two things from this. First of all, sometimes when I'm preaching, and I've done this, I've learned this well from older preachers. Sometimes I'm preaching and someone will pass and come forward or come and talk to me after the service and they say, oh, Brother Paul, I'm so afraid of hell. I want to be saved. And I say, I'm sorry. That's not enough. Any snake will run to save its life when a field is on fire, but it's still a snake. Young man, if you're going to come to Him, you have to come to Him because you're broken out of love for your trespasses against Him and His kindness to you. And you want to love Him and adore Him and glorify Him. Salvation is not a ticket to escape hell. It is a relationship with God. But another thing that those of you who are saints here tonight, who are Christians, I want you to look at this. Look what it says. The love of Christ, does it control you? The Bible said in every true believer, the love of God has been manifested, shed abroad.